Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today. My name is Joe Burkhart. I'm with Oracle's Industry Solution Group, serving education and research, and specifically higher education. Today we're going to be talking about the voice of the student and how to actually start examining the issues and the challenges facing a student's experience in attending higher education. A couple of things to begin with. First, if you've ever seen an Oracle presentation, you've seen our safe harbor statement. Basically, we're saying today that everything that we talk about, if we talk about products today, and I'll have just a little bit of product discussion at the end, is currently existing. And if by chance I would slip up and talk about some things in the future, then we would have to talk about that if you actually acquired it and not necessarily be held to it until it's actually released and generally available. My name is Joe Burkhart. I'm Director of Higher Education Solutions in the Industry Solution Group. With me today is Bob Stewart, who's Director of Service Delivery at Apex IT for Higher Education, and also Charles Derrick, who's an actual student, and we're going to be having a bit of a panel discussion in a few minutes to kind of start talking about and setting the stage for some follow-up things we're going to do around the overall student experience and how institutions can start thinking about mapping and designing their business processes from a student point of view and what the students' actual issues are as they're facing that today. So our overall agenda, we'll start off talking about why student expectations are on the rise, and then we'll get into a little bit about the disconnect in the modern student's journey. We'll then go into our panel discussions, and at that point I'll let both Bob and Charles introduce themselves. And after we get through the panel discussion, assuming we have time, we'll talk about some new strategies and techniques to help enable a modern student experience today. Okay, with that said, let's start thinking about the context we're dealing with today's modern students. They have a high utilization of social media. In fact, what we're seeing is more and more social media being the channel of choice to actually research institutions, to try to acquire service or to find service from institutions, and to deal with their institutions post-graduation. So it's across the entire student life cycle. The challenge for higher education institutions is, what's the social media flavor of the day, right? Is it Twitter? Is it Yik Yak? Is it Snapchat? Is it Facebook? Is it whatever it is? And those are constantly changing. So how do we deal with that environment, recognizing that our current students and our constituents are everywhere? Students say social media conversations influences where they're going to go. We're seeing rapid uptake across all age groups, but especially within that kind of traditional and even extended age range for traditional students from 18 to 29. They have smartphones, and they're using those smartphones or tablets to acquire social media. And a bigger trend, a trend that we're really trying to manage as a higher education industry, is the fact that students frequently change college. 60% of all bachelor's degree recipients have changed college before they actually completed their degree. So we start liking to think about the concept that digital changes everything. We used to, when we started off designing most of our business processes, it was designed with the idea that students would be coming in the door to see us, and then we built transactional systems to serve that. With today's atmosphere of online retail, of social communications, it's drastically changing the expectations that students are bringing forward and how institutions need to serve those students and reach out to them and successfully interact with them. Institutions are under a lot of pressure to deliver the best experience. As you can see by this slide, a high percentage of students across all sectors chose their institutions because they received personalized attention prior to enrollment, not mass marketing, not even mass personalization in marketing, but true personalized contextual information that helps them decide where to go and how to receive services. And a lot of institutions aren't necessarily delivering on that student experience. Again, if we take a look at these statistics, which are a follow-up and developed by Noel Levitz in the last calendar year, students aren't satisfied with their overall student experience, and that starts to affect retention rates and graduation rates, and it affects your recruiting because of the dynamic influence of social. If a student has a bad experience, they're much more likely to tweet about it or post it on Facebook or send it out through Yik Yak than they are to actually complain to an administrator about their experience. And as costs increase and there's more competition in the space, institutions are under very high pressure to increase their effectiveness of their recruitment and retention programs to both serve those students and to meet the new accountability standards that are being placed upon them. So with that, we're going to go in and start our discussion with Charles and Bob. So if we would, actually, Bob, if you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll hand it off to Charles.
Thanks, Joe. My name is Bob Stewart. I'm Director of Service Delivery in the Higher Ed group at Apex IT, focusing on delivering and implementing Oracle Higher Ed solutions to institutions. Charles?
Hey, thank you. My name is Charles Derrick. I am a rising junior. I go to school out east, and I study international affairs. I'm originally from Chicago, and I am currently in Washington, D.C.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us today. So we have a slide up about seniors and juniors, high school seniors and juniors, as they're starting the college selection process. And some of the interesting statistics that we're starting to see is a new study by Noel Levitz ranks social media as the second channel of choice for students to actually interact with their schools and to find information about schools. I guess, Charles, from your perspective, how do you see, when you're talking to your friends and your peers, how do you see social media playing into, I guess, the college choice process, the college recruitment process, and just in your everyday lives, and how are you seeing that affecting your experience in college and university?
That's a really good question, and I think it's an important time to be asking the question, because I think at this point, universities are sort of at an apex where they have the potential to really define how they're going to use social media in the future. And there's no doubt that it's an important tool, but I think expectations need to be set from an early point in the relationship with a student on how it's going to be used. And there needs to be an understanding by the university that there are appropriate times to use social media, and there are times when a student, absolutely does not need to hear from the university over Twitter or over Facebook. I had an experience last year where I had gotten sick over a 4-day weekend, and as I was looking up information on student health, I actually saw our dean of students tweeting about going sledding, and it took me 4 days actually to get in touch with that office, and so that sort of put a bad taste in my mouth, and managed to form that image I had of that office, which shouldn't happen in that sort of a way. And so I think the best way to move forward and sort of define that relationship and provide a clear understanding between the university and students is to include the students in the process of communication and really understand from the time that they apply to the time that they attend and throughout that entire experience, have a good understanding of what they want and what their interests are and what their expectations are of when the university decides it is able to reach out.
Thanks. So Bob, how do you see institutions as you're helping them implement CRM or student experience solutions? How do you see them adapting to the new social expectations, and how do you advise them?
Well, right now, Joe, a lot of institutions are just getting started in social media. They're realizing how important it is, and as Charles was saying, they're trying to be very careful about the expectations that are being set and when to communicate. And so right now, a lot of institutions, like I said, are just getting involved in social media. They're trying to find the best way to be involved and find that mix between over-communicating and under-communicating and using it to the best of its ability. And a lot of what we're doing with our institutions is talking with them about some strategies that they can use to start what we call a crawl, walk, run process, where you start off small, you set your expectations as to what you're going to do, and you start very slowly, and you slowly ramp up. That it gives you the ability to not only oversaturate your students with your social media experience, but to also be flexible. That as times change and as things change, you can be flexible and move with those changes.
Excellent. So in a follow-up to that question, we're really seeing today, for lack of a better term, information overload, right? There's content being generated at exponential paces, and that's being fed out to a variety of people, but specifically in the education context, we send out a lot of information from schools to our students. In fact, I read a study 4 or 5 years ago about one community college that was having a hard time getting its students to register for classes every term, and when they actually did a communication analysis, they found they were mailing over 200 different pieces of, or sending out over 200 pieces of content trying to tell students how to register and when to register, and students were just starting to ignore it. There was so much content going at them. I guess, Charles, if we think about this information overload, how do students want their institutions to reach out to them today, and how frequently, and what is too much, and what kind of information, all those kind of things? You know, how do we help a student separate, you know, the valuable information from all the clutter and the noise?
Well, I think that example is a really good introduction to the issue, and in my mind, it raises an analogy that I think universities should not try to be the cool kid. You know, universities should not try to just bombard students with, you know, Facebook messages or Twitter notifications, because that's not the expectation from the student. And I think there's a gap that needs to be bridged from a university standpoint, that universities need to meet a certain level of competency with social media, and that's difficult, certainly for people who aren't used to that, and especially as new technologies and new applications and different platforms are emerging so quickly. I think Yik Yak was mentioned earlier, and that's something that's, you know, just come out in the past few, I think maybe a little more than a year ago, really has expanded rapidly, and is another example of how students are reaching out and being vocal with what they think. But I think in general, students expect tailored communication. And for example, it would be acceptable for a university to use Instagram to put up pictures from a football game, to put up student profiles, to give really an in-depth you know, understanding of the university that's enabled by how that application is designed to work. Whereas if the university were to send out, you know, an email chain that has student profiles or different information about programs that are available or resources within the university, would not have the same effect. And having that general understanding is important, and like I said, is a bridge that needs to be gapped by universities. And student input can help with that. And I think that is a good way to get an understanding of what the student expects. But and another important thing that a university has to consider, I think, is frequency, because I think you need to combine need-based information with information that is, you know, determined by current events, what's going on, different sort of, you know, programming things that are coming up. Because students, they get bombarded with information, and that registration example is indicative of a problem, I think, at most universities. And it doesn't just have to do with things that are required of the students. A lot of times I'll get emails about university programming that has absolutely nothing to do with me. And if I'm in the middle of finals or you know, going through something difficult at work, I'm immediately going to delete an email with a subject line for, you know, who knows, some sort of basketball tailgate or some other event like that. So I think there has to be an additional understanding of when it's appropriate to reach out to students, because without that knowledge, it's very easy to cross the line, and it is a delicate line. And I think that now is the point in time when universities really have to consider and respect what students think in order to determine a baseline for how communication should be approached.
Wow, that was pretty insightful. So, Bob, can you share some of the ways that you guys are helping institutions reach out to students and to give them the content that they need when they need it?
Absolutely, Joe. One of the things that we like to help our institutions with is help them identify ways to let the students tell them when they want to be communicated with and how they want to be communicated to. Like Charles was saying, it's inappropriate to get program information for a program I'm not involved with. Some institutions are working to find ways to let students very specifically identify what those communication preferences are and what those channels of communication are. So that could be selecting from sports communications or program-specific communications, things of that nature, and working to make sure that those are enforced. And part of that process, once you get students to volunteer how they want to be communicated to and what they want to get communications on, it's important to make sure that the entire university is aware of that. And one of the things we've seen is that a lot of institutions are very siloed. And so students may make one set of preferences based on their program that they're in, but their information belongs to the athletics department, who has a whole separate set of information about that student. And they may not have those preferences. So it's important to not only identify the preferences of the students, but to also make sure that those preferences are shared university-wide, so that there's a central location where organizations can find who to send information to and when to send it. The other important thing, I think, is that making sure you're targeting those communications for specific purposes. It doesn't do a lot of good, like Charles was saying, to get lots and lots of repeated emails if it's not important information. And so making sure that those communications are targeted for a specific purpose, whether that be for new programs that are available or for academic assistance programs that are available, things of that nature. It's important to make sure you're targeting those so that people get the specific message you're talking about. One of the other institutions that we work with is also using social media to really generate excitement for the university, and they really treat some of their social media broadcasts as like little mini parties, and they really hype it up, and they get a lot of response from that because it's something that's exciting. It's not a generic, hey, we're going to have a session at this location. It's a community event, and it's something that people get excited about, and it drives a lot of attendance, and it drives a lot of excitement around those events as well.
Wow, excellent. So let's think specifically about the admissions process. So we see a lot of schools focusing heavily on that, and then both schools and students are trying to streamline the process from each side. Schools are trying to make that process, and I used the term frictionless earlier, to make it as easy as possible to complete the admissions process and decide about where students are actually going to matriculate. From a student's point of view, they may be looking at, now not just one or two institutions when I went to school in the 70s, but 7, 8, 9, maybe a dozen different institutions, and really getting into information overload again for that term when they're getting into the process of actually making a decision where to go. I guess, Charles, from your point of view, and again, you've been in school for a while, but if you can think back a long time ago, 3 or 4 years ago, when you were going through the admissions process, can you tell us about some of the pain points that you experienced when you were in the college selection process and going through the application process and actually deciding where to enroll, and what would have made it easier for you?
Well, I think the biggest pain in going through the admissions process is the fact that most students and typically parents are doing it alone. A lot of high schools obviously have resources that are available, and some are great, but I think for the most part, when you're approaching I've heard close to 20 universities that people are capable of applying to. You can put a common application out to several universities in the same night. But when you're approaching that many institutions, it can be pretty overwhelming. And when I was going through the process, which would have been 2012, 2013, universities were making an effort to reach out, but for the most part, it was postcards in the mail, it was emails or surveys saying, how was your tour? But no universities really made an effort to reach out on a more personal level, which in that point in time, which is pretty formative, I think is crucial, because it's at that point when a university can either seize the opportunity to connect with a student or fail to do so. And I think, as I kind of brought up before, students want and students, I think, deserve a tailored experience. So if a university was to reach out to a student who provided an email address and say, thanks for coming, and have a look into what it's like to be a student here, and have a look at some student experiences, because at that point in time, it's extremely overwhelming, the amount of uncertainty that students go through, and that social, academic, professional, all different sorts of realms. Students have no idea what they're getting into. So social media represents a pretty incredible opportunity for universities to convey messages that they wouldn't normally be able to convey through a postcard that they would send. An Instagram account, for example, that was managed by the university, orchestra or football team, whatever it may be, is a pretty unique opportunity for the university to really release information that would not normally come out. So for prospective students to have a grasp of different resources such as those different platforms is a really good opportunity for universities to convey that message that would not normally come out. And I think social media is kind of a touchy subject in admissions, but if it's understood properly, I think it can be used to showcase the school. But again, the frequency and the way that outreach is conducted is very important. So, it's not acceptable for a university to reach out over Facebook to a student or something like that. Stick to email, certainly, for more, professional communication. I think another thing that universities have to consider also in the process, like I brought up before, is parents, because parents ultimately, in most cases, are going to have a really big say in the final decision. So for parents also to have a better understanding of how the university uses social media is crucial, is critical, because parents, similar to people who are in charge of social media at schools, probably don't have a great understanding or no understanding at all, for that matter, of how the university reaches out to its students. And I know that, I have family going through the admissions process right now, and it's very important for them to understand what resources are available to their kids. And so, for example, for parents to know how and when the university has reached out to students for mental health issues, for example, or an issue in class, if a student is doing really poorly, not going to class, for example. For parents to have a solid understanding of how that works is critical in the admissions process. I think it takes proactive decisions on behalf of the university in order to make that happen, be it during a tour. If you could give a briefing to parents on how the university uses social media and how it's becoming important, I think is a really unique opportunity.
Wow. That was a pretty thorough and thoughtful response. Thank you, Charles. So, Bob, what kind of strategies have you seen institutions use to help improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of their admissions processes?
Well, a lot of institutions, as Charles mentioned, they really want to make it more personal. For so long, admissions to university has been almost a numbers game, in the sense of how many people can we get involved. As you get applications up, the likelihood of getting more students in goes up. But institutions are realizing that students want to have a more personal experience. They want to feel like they're having a relationship with that admissions officer, and that they can trust them. And because there are lots of institutions they can choose from. And so a student wants to find one that they're comfortable with. And having that personal one-on-one relationship with somebody, if at all possible, is what would help foster that student coming to their institution. So institutions are doing things to make the communication process more personal, but they're using tools to automate that so that it's not taking more time, which is a great benefit in the admission side at the university, because it allows them to work more, carry on those relationships, but not have a higher staff. Some of the other things they're doing is making sure that the students are, if they're going to use social media, that students are getting those communications about things that are pertinent to them. So things like tracking web visits and sending personalized communications about areas of interest, where a student may not, or a prospective student may not specifically ask for information about a specific program. If you know they've been visiting your website to a specific location on your website numerous times, that's an opportunity to send some media out to them about that program or about the areas that they're interested in. They may not ask for the information, but they're clearly interested because they're doing the research on it. The other thing they're doing is they're really trying to, especially using social media, they're trying to link up current students with prospective students in a mentoring capacity. And again, to make that relationship feel more personal. One of the things that the students realize is that, prospective students realize, is that it is a long and complicated process to get enrolled into a university. And so the universities can match up current students who can be advisees or mentors to prospective students to walk them through the process, to answer their questions, to help guide them through the admissions process. That again builds that personal relationship with the university and makes that prospective student more likely to attend in the future. And they're using social media to do these things because it's an easy way to communicate with the students. The last thing that they're doing is they're really making sure that students, prospective students, can easily get to see their progress in the admissions process from wherever they are. In the past, a lot of self-service portals have been computer-based. They're really trying to make all of that information accessible from their phones or from any other mobile device because everyone's using mobile devices these days. So they're really working to build out processes that allow those prospective students to check on the status, see what they need to still submit or see where they are in the process from their mobile devices, because then they can check on it anytime they want to instead of when they're just sitting in front of the computer.
Yeah, a lot of different activities going on to truly make these experiences personal and contextual, right? So let's take a look at a different angle. So I've read some interesting things lately about the use of, and we've been talking a lot about social media, but it seems to be one of the driving factors that's affecting all parts of experience, both in the commercial side and specifically within higher education. So I've been seeing a lot of information about the rise of social media to elicit complaints, to talk about complaints, to share bad experiences and not just good experiences. And that can have a tremendous effect on business in the commercial sector, and it has a huge effect on higher education and student satisfaction. 20 years ago when I was a financial aid director, if I got a complaint letter or a complaint phone call, it was usually just me and that student dealing with it, or the only other people who might know about it would be, his friends in the cafeteria or his friends in his residence hall. Now if a student has a complaint about some operation within the university, there may be thousands of people who know about it before the institution ever does. And that creates a huge demand on both conflict resolution, issue resolution, and actually raising a higher bar for standards of service. So, Charles, could you share with us how bad experiences affect students, either yourself or your friends and your peers, and how you expect an institution to find out about and address issues when you have a bad experience?
Sure, and I think that point you just raised about the fact that information really can travel quickly, and it does. It absolutely does. Presents a huge challenge for universities, but from the other point of view, it could also present a great opportunity for the university to be able to reach out. But that being said, it's a dangerous area for universities to address issues over social media against a specific issue that was brought up. I think that it's okay, it's acceptable from a student perspective for a university to scan or monitor different social media platforms in order to identify complaints or maybe even just more general patterns of disapproval. But it's not appropriate for a university to go out and for example, call a student out on a social media platform. And I've seen that before, specifically on Twitter, where a student raised an issue and a university came out and said, this is why you're wrong, and this is what we're doing. And that's valid in some scenarios, but I think in general that's kind of a dangerous path to go down. I think in general it's acceptable for universities to be concerned with what students are saying. That's important, and it's important that they gather that information because it's out there, and the university can either choose to monitor that or it can choose to ignore it. But like was mentioned before, platforms like Yik Yak, for example, where things are posted anonymously, do present a big challenge. But like I mentioned, it's important for the university to stay on top of that. And there is an expectation by students that the university is aware of what's going on in the social realm that's available to everyone. I mean, there's no reason why a university shouldn't be reviewing these different platforms. But I think the best thing to do if a student were to use a social media outlet to express some sort of discontent, I think is to provide a clear expression of the resources that are available and what students can do if they do encounter a problem. And I think that in certain scenarios it's okay to address a student in private, but generally if a university were to, for example, if a student complained over Facebook, a university could take to Facebook and post something on their own that explained, where a student could reach out for writing resources or advising services, and sort of that in that regard. And it is okay for universities to address that in general, but it's not okay for universities to go after specific issues with students.
Okay, so Bob, what are you seeing schools do to not only improve the student experience, but to reach out and address bad experiences?
One of the most important things is having tools that allow them to do those things. So as Charles was saying, monitoring is acceptable for schools to monitor social media, but to have somebody monitoring social media is unrealistic. And so having a good tool set in place that allows that monitoring of social media to see both the good and the bad is important for an institution to be involved. Once they identify that either good or bad experience through social media, then really it's a matter of putting in a business process of how are you going to address that. Like Charles said, one of the worst things you can do is to aggressively engage someone through social media. I think everyone's seen experiences of that in the commercial market and probably in the higher ed market as well, of somebody engaging in that social media war back and forth, and that's never productive. And so it's important to have a good business process in place to know what you're going to do in response to that. Is it going to be a general response of resources that are available? Is it going to be a private communication if you happen to know that student because you know their Twitter handle or because you know their Facebook page? What is that business process going to be to address that with the students and with the social media as a whole? Because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want that one bad comment to turn into a snowball. You really want to get it addressed and make sure that the student who made the comment realizes that there are resources available to them. And if there are other students who are maybe have the same complaint and just hadn't thought to put it on social media, you want those students to also be aware that there are resources to resolve it, whether that being having a one-on-one conversation or calling into a desk or whatever that case may be. You want to make sure that everyone who happens to be following that social media tag knows that there are resources available. And then, like I said, it is a matter of if it requires a one-on-one communication, make sure that process is efficient to deal with that student on a one-on-one basis. Reach out to them if they so desire to have that one-on-one conversation to get the issue resolved, and make sure that it's an efficient process. Don't make them jump through hoops to get things done. Make sure they realize that, hey, we have your best interest in mind here, and we want to get this resolved as quickly as possible. And don't ever have an expectation that someone's going to post a positive resolution to social media after they've posted a negative experience. And the reality is that society as a whole would rather post their bad experiences than a good experience. And so as long as the institutions realize that you may resolve it behind the scenes, but you may never get credit for that, then just be prepared for that and don't have an expectation of the glowing, oh, they did so well for me to resolve this, because it may or may not happen.
Yeah, that's true. We can't always, as hard as we try, always get that thumbs up, right?
Right.
Okay, so let's start wrapping up our conversation here. So I guess to close, Charles, from your perspective and from a student's perspective, what address or what advice do you have for our audience, and what can they do to make the student experience at their institution be more aligned with what the student's expectation is?
I think the first thing that I would say in that regard is that students want to be taken seriously. And I think a lot of times it's easy for students to sort of disregard what the university says just because, like I brought up in my first point, it's sort of a point in time when students aren't really used to hearing from the university on non-traditional platforms. But it's also a time where the university can set an expectation, starting with the admissions process, of how they intend to communicate and stay engaged with the students, because that engagement really does keep students around for the duration of their college experience and importantly for the university for the rest of their lives if done correctly. And I think it's important to consider that during the college process, students want a partner or a mentor. They don't need another parent. They don't need, a buddy. They need a university that is willing to actively provide resources and stay on top of the entire process as students progress, because the university, I think, has a responsibility to progress alongside the student. The needs for a freshman are completely different than the needs for a senior, although there are, obviously, like the example raised earlier, some issues that apply to everyone. For example, registering for classes. Like I said earlier, too, set expectations early on and then continue that discussion throughout the entire duration of the experience. I think creating that understanding during the admissions process and then maintaining contact is the best way to stay engaged with the student. And that assumes that the university is staying updated and on top of what they can do to reach out to students. And that, like the first point I raised, means that students must be taken seriously and they must be listened to, or otherwise the university is just going to be left behind, because the students are always going to keep progressing. That won't stop. Like we had mentioned a few times, actively tailor the content to the level the students are at, and also tailor the frequency. That is kind of a call on behalf of the university that they're going to have to make. But, it's easy to know that sophomores and juniors should be thinking about internships and jobs. It's okay for the university to reach out at that point in time. It's also okay for freshmen to just be aware of the sort of resources they have available to them, because, you can't preclude, obviously, some students from information that's going to be necessary for them. And I think that gets back to the mentor, the partner aspect of things, rather than the parent or a more condescending role that some universities have taken. And I think ultimately the final point is that students need to know that they're the priority. And I think a lot of universities have made an effort, and it's been noticed. It does get noticed by the students. And it's important for the students to know that the school is involved. And to that extent, it's okay for the student to experiment with social media. It's okay for the university to take risks and do things that are not traditional, because even if they're not as successful as they're hoped to be, it at least shows that the university is willing to make a change. The university is willing to do something that is in the interest of their students. Students really do pick up on that. And like it was before, social media rather can present some challenges, but moving forward, there are a profound number of opportunities that can come from these technologies by universities.
Excellent. So, Bob, based on your experience, what advice do you have for our audience today?
Well, I think just a couple of points that are key. Number one, like I mentioned before, is that process of that feeling of crawl, walk, run. don't try to do too much if you're getting into social media right off the bat. I agree with Charles that it's good to take some risks and maybe make some mistakes, but it's also important that you don't take on more than you can handle right off the bat. So along with that process of the crawl, walk, run, you also need to be flexible because we've already mentioned that social media is constantly changing. The social media that was around 2 years ago may not be around right now, and what's here today may not be here 6 months or a year from now. So whatever you're going to do in regards to social media, you need to make sure to be flexible so that you can stay with the times. Because the reality is, like Charles said, the students are going to be with whatever the latest social media item is. And if the institution is a year behind what the latest and greatest social media tool is, then the students aren't going to be impressed by that because they're not going to see the institution as being innovative and on par with the times. So making sure you're being flexible. And then lastly, it's making sure that you are being specific about your communications. You don't want to oversaturate your students with communications because they're going to start ignoring them and just throwing things away and ignoring those posts on social media. So you want to make sure you're targeted and specific about it and listening to what the student wants to hear, making sure that you're not sending them stuff that is totally unrelated to what they're studying or what their interests are, and you're listening to what that student wants to hear from the university about.
Excellent. So from my experience, and I talk to institutions every day, every week. That's part of my job here at Oracle. We're really seeing kind of a paradigm shift, especially not only in how we're trying to make our schools successful in dealing with that, but how schools are actually looking at it. So the big thing that we're seeing is starting to do a process called journey mapping. In the past, we've traditionally built our transactional processes based upon what we had to do. Process an admissions application, evaluate an admissions application, admit a student, receive a financial aid application, make sure it's complete with all the documents, verify it, package, get an award out the door, and disperse. Identify students that need to take courses, get the sections opened up, have them register for courses, get them through process grades, and then do that all over again until we get to graduation. And we designed our customer experience processes, our student experience processes to match those transactions. What we need to start thinking about doing now, I believe, is to start doing those things from a student perspective and mapping out the student journey through a particular stage of the life cycle or through a particular business process that they need to complete across multiple departments when they need to, and then making the transactional activities match those. And that's where we're starting to get forward, is to start doing things like journey mapping, process design across multiple departments, and taking a look at it from the student point of view. And that gets into kind of some of our next points as we go forward with the rest of our presentation today. So when we start thinking about new strategies, I just talked a little bit about journey mapping, and we just heard the advice from Charles and from Bob about setting expectations, making information contextual, delivering the right information at the right time, not going into overload. So in the past, as I said, we've really talked about a traditional student and looking at all our students as one big group, or looking at all our students as a cohort of types, all math majors, or all first-generation college students, or all students with financial aid. And we've tried to drive our processes about that. What we've really been thinking about there is just getting down and getting the process done, getting the transactions processed. What we're really moving to now, and it's being forced on us by both outcomes and accountability expectations, and also by the experiences that are going on outside of higher education, increasing those expectations. We're really trying to build a lifelong student relationship now at every single transaction, at every single interaction, I should say. And to get back to, the complaints versus compliments, we want to have a thumbs up. We want to have a like. We want to have a 4 out of 5 stars after every single interaction with a student now. In order to do that, we have to think about what that student experience is. So it's a fundamental shift in how we're actually thinking about running our operations and how we're utilizing technologies to enable that. So that said, at Oracle, we've put together our Oracle Customer Experience Cloud and have now tailored that specifically for higher education with some capabilities to meet the entire student life cycle. And we used to break out, all of us in higher education used to break out the student life cycle into 3 or 4 big segments, from recruiting a new student and getting them to matriculate, to the in-school period, to the alumni and development phase, to postgraduate or lifelong learning phase. We really need to start thinking about those more as what are the things that students need to do, right? What kind of outreach do we need to have? How do students want to be recruited? What are their learning paths? What do they need to do to actually enroll in a course? All those kind of things. And then where do our CRM, or as we refer to them, our constituent experience solutions, enable that? And you need components out of a lot of different, or you need capabilities to meet those student experience expectations. So we've started thinking about the idea of student engagement, which is, how do we communicate with the student? Which channels do we do it? How do we manage multiple channels, not just for a cross-channel or multi-channel, but a true omni-channel experience? And then how does that support student recruiting? How does that support student service? How does that support advancement? And how do those all relate? And underneath that, being supported by things like an internal social network for collaboration and coordination, and supporting mobile and driving the right kind of analytics, and not just predictive analytics, but prescriptive analytics to actually support the student outcomes. So this is our new view of cloud solutions now to support student experience. And that becomes part of our complete modern campus for higher education, including human capital management, the student cloud, which is both the new student information system and our constituent experience and CRM solutions, and then enterprise resource planning, which are the key financials pieces, and all of those running under a modern cloud umbrella, or a modern cloud platform, I should say. Excuse me. So when we start thinking about how schools actually go down this path, how they actually start to transform, as Bob said, crawl, walk, run. When I was consulting, we used to say, think big, but start small and deliver something fast. So we've actually taken the components at Oracle and the capabilities and tried to put together a pathway to start delivering a better student experience, and if you're not on a cloud pathway right now, to actually start the migration to cloud and software as a service. So we could start with looking at the student engagement component and how we manage the overall outreach and engagement and social interactions. We could start by, or you could start by thinking about how you recruit students under these new paradigms. You could start by just focusing on student services, and maybe not all your student services, but just one specific area within student services, or we can think about advancement. But the idea is, let's start on something that's small, let's generate some quick wins, and then let's grow that out to the institution so that we're managing that entire student life cycle, delivering contextual and, for lack of a better term, omni-channel experience across mobile and all social and communication channels to a student that's really meeting the expectations that they have today. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Bob to talk a little bit about Apex IT, and then we'll go back and take a look at your questions.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, so for everyone who doesn't know Apex IT, we are an Oracle CRM CX implementer. We've been partnering with Oracle since 1997, implementing the various CRM and CX solutions that they have to offer. You'll see on this slide a few of the institutions we have done some work with. We are a certified Platinum Oracle partner. We have been the Oracle Specialized Partner of the Year in CRM for the last 2 times that that's been offered. And one of the things we focus on is making sure that the institution has a successful implementation. We know that a tool set isn't going to solve all problems. So you'll see on this slide that CRM is a part of a bigger picture of people, process, and technology. CRM by itself doesn't solve all the problems, and so we like to work with our institutions to make sure that we identify the process and the people that go along with that technology to help make this successful. And we've been successful at many institutions.
So our end-to-end solutions, Oracle solution applications, are part of our complete modern student solution, and including a new student information system and student analytics that are in development. Many of the CRM or CX components are available today. In fact, all the ones that I talked about in that earlier graphic are available today, and institutions are both utilizing them and new institutions are implementing them. They connect to all the background apps and connect to each other in order to fulfill that personalized experience, and come with some very sophisticated data management that helps you to aggregate and enrich that data in order to actually understand the context that students are trying to manage and what they're trying to accomplish. So our end-to-end CX solutions actually will grow with your institution. And as I said, as we think about a path to this, you can start small and then grow it out across the institution to develop that complete enterprise-wide student experience. But you don't have to think about doing that all at once. So together with Apex and Oracle, we want to thank you for attending today. We do have some questions that are in the inbox, and by the way, just for all of your information, we're not opening up the phone lines today. We're taking questions exclusively by chat, so you'll need to, if you have a question, send us to us through chat. But I'm going to ask a couple here, actually one that's come in for Bob. So Bob, how long does it take an institution to integrate social media into their processes? I guess starting from no social media concept to actually developing a strategy and getting it implemented.
Yeah, it depends how intense the university wants to go. We have seen some institutions get started on social media in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes even shorter than that. And getting started in those solutions could be something as simple as implementing a social media monitoring tool and just getting a feel for what's happening in the social media realm around that university. And then building on that to handle outbound communications and things of that nature. But to get started with a basic implementation and integrate social media, you can usually get started in around 6 to 8 weeks.
Excellent. I've got a couple of questions here that well, actually, that one's just got a sign. Let me take a look. So actually, Charles, here's one to you, and then maybe Bob and I can add it up. Can you provide an example on how a university may be not listening to their students right now? And do you think, I'm sorry, I got to scroll down here to read the rest of it. Do you think that communicating vital information such as grade changes or maybe class availability via email is still appropriate, or through private messaging in the social media or through some other channel that may be available?
So just to address the latter part of that question, I think first is most important is that it's important to remember that social media is just that. It's meant for the social sphere. It's meant for the social realm. And while there is overlap a lot of times between, different things that would cross into professional environments, it is important in regard to vital information, I think, should stay connected to email, phone calls, and that's it. Because I think once you cross that line with, for example, grade changes, like you mentioned, if that was communicated on another platform, I think you start to get on a road where the end really isn't clear. So if you communicate grade changes via, a message over Facebook, or I'm not sure how else you could do that, then I think you sort of enter a realm where different communication isn't always clearly provided. So I think to maintain a single line of communication, which primarily I believe should be done through email, to maintain that single understanding keeps things clear, and it keeps things prioritized the way that they deserve to be understood.
Okay, excellent. I don't see any more questions in our inbox. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending. Bob or Charles, do you have any final closing comments you'd like to make?
Shoot, thanks for having me. Good luck, everybody.
Okay, thanks. How about you, Bob?
I just want to thank everyone for attending today, and appreciate the time today.
Okay. So if you'd like any further information, please feel free to reach out to us in any mode that you want. And again, thanks for attending. I hope we provided you some valuable information today.